Coal and other fossil fuels are still ingrained in infrastructure across the globe, and as we just saw, transitioning away from them is no easy task. But scientists warn if we don't make drastic changes in the coming years, climate change could devastate civilization as we know it. Bill McKibben is an activist who was one of the first to raise the alarm about the coming danger. He's an environmentalist and author of Falter, Has the Human Game Begun to Play Itself Out? He spoke with my colleague Elaine Quijano about the potential consequences of not taking action on climate change.
Let's start with coal. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, U.S. coal production has fallen 244 million tons just since 2014. But worldwide demand for coal is holding steady. Why is that?
Well, coal is beginning to tumble because everybody knows it's the dirtiest of possible fuels. It's holding on because they're continuing to build a few plants, new plants in Southeast Asia and places, but around the world demand for coal has now begun to shrink. It's been replaced by natural gas, which sadly isn't much cleaner, if at all. What we really need to do is make the leap straight to renewable energy.
Well, you've spoken about how India could actually skip the so-called coal stage of its energy development. Could you explain that and why it's important?
Sure. The price of a solar panel has fallen 90% in the last decade, and that's opened up a whole new realm of possibilities. So in India right now, it costs about $40 a megawatt hour to generate electricity using the sun, and it costs about $50 to do it using coal. That's why they installed about 40 times more renewable energy than coal last year in India. The trend is unmistakable. The question is, can it go fast enough to catch up with global warming? And at the moment, especially in our part of the world, that's not happening.
So let me ask you more about that. How ingrained is coal in infrastructure in the U.S. and the rest of the world? And what will it take for countries to transition to renewable sources of energy?
Well, what it'll take at this point is a real push from governments. Eventually, economics alone will do the job. And if we had 50 years to deal with global warming, that's all we'd need. But we don't. We're already, as you know, in an emergency. In fact, the British House of Commons this week passed a declaration declaring that we were in a climate emergency around the world. What that means is we need to move more quickly than economics alone will take us. And that's why proposals like the Green New Deal and things are so important. They're a way to kind of goose the system and get it moving.
Well, in your book, you discuss how climate change could lead to human extinction. Can you explain how that could happen?
Sure. I wrote the first book about climate change 30 years ago this year, and at the time it was still a kind of warning. But now it's not a warning at all. Now it's the brute fact of daily life for hundreds of millions of people. Last year we saw the highest temperatures ever recorded reliably on planet Earth, 129 degrees in a series of cities across the Middle East and the Asian subcontinent. The scientists tell us that on current trajectories, vast swaths of the world will have temperatures like that as a normal thing by the middle of this century. Human beings can't deal with that kind of temperature. That's why the UN thinks there may be 1 billion climate migrants on the move in the course of this century. We're heading into completely unprecedented territory, and if we don't take action soon, our ability to forestall this will be gone.
Well, and a lot of talk about climate change is in terms of future effects, but we're already seeing some of the effects today. What are they?
Well, I mean, sometimes they're very dramatic. I mean, you remember watching the pictures last year when, after an unprecedented drought and heat wave, a California city literally called paradise literally turned into hell inside half an hour. But usually the effects are more insidious. They're the kind of long-term droughts that leave farmers unable to grow food, and so they have to move off their land. That's where many of the migrants who started the civil war in Syria came from. That's where many of the migrants from Honduras and Guatemala who end up on our southern border, that's what's pushing them. That's why the Pentagon has been so outspoken and alarmed about climate change for the last few years. They know it's the great source of instability in the world now.
Well, and the effects of climate change are not just external, but are also internal in our bodies and minds. Can you explain that?
If we let carbon keep mounting in the atmosphere, eventually it'll reach a point where it begins to interfere even with our ability, with our cognition, our ability to think clearly. But long before that happens, we're seeing the effects in human spread of disease around the planet. The insects that carry one bug after another, from Lyme disease to Zika virus, they like the warmer, wetter world we're creating for them. That's why their range expands all the time, and with it, these threats to human health.
Well, you write that the work of philosopher Ayn Rand has a significant impact on why we have not made more progress on climate change. Why is that?
Right at the moment when we really needed governments to step up, when we first found out about climate change in the 1980s, that was also the moment when this ideology that markets can solve all problems, that government is the problem, not the solution, that's when those really took hold. And they've been things that prevented us from taking action. They allowed the fossil fuel industry to mount this 30-year propaganda effort to make people doubt whether global warming was real. That's not a doubt scientists share, but it's a doubt that much of the public shares after $1 billion propaganda effort over the last 3 decades.
So what is the timeline here to turn things around, and what actually needs to be done?
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world's climate scientists, told us last September that if we hadn't begun to make fundamental transformation by 2030, we would never catch up. So the Green New Deal, for instance, has interpreted that as meaning real decarbonization of the American economy over the next dozen years. That'll be a very hard task. It would have been much easier if we'd started 30 years ago. But it's within the realm of the possible, thanks to the engineers who've really done their work well in reducing the cost of renewable energy. And the cost is far, far, far lower than the cost of not doing anything and letting climate change continue to spiral out of control.
Well, your book is not entirely doom and gloom. In the final section of your book titled An Outside Chance, you give us some reasons to be hopeful for our future. What are they?
Well, one of the things that really moved me was getting to go to Africa and watch solar energy be deployed in places that had never had power, where fossil fuel might as well never have been discovered. There's 1 billion people without electricity now, but they're getting it finally, thanks not to coal or gas or oil, but to solar power. And to see towns where they used to deliver a baby with a doctor with a flashlight between his teeth, and now he has a refrigerator to store vaccine, that's great. The other thing that's hopeful is the fact that people are rising up in movements to take action. That's why we started 350.org, which became the first big global climate campaign. It's really wonderful to watch young people taking the lead at the Sunrise Movement with the Green New Deal, or the millions following Greta Thunberg into these school strikes that started in Sweden and have spread out around the planet.
Well, ultimately, Bill, do you think humans will survive the effects of climate change?
I think that we're going to be vastly impoverished if we let things continue going in the way they're going now. And sadly, the people who will be hurt first and hardest are the people who've done the least to cause this problem. That's kind of the iron law of climate change. Our job at the moment, at this point, we can't stop global warming. We may be able to slow the climate crisis down enough that it doesn't take out our civilizations, but that'll require nimble, fast action.
All right, Bill McKibben, author of Falter, Has the Human Game Begun to Play Itself Out? Thanks so much, Bill, for joining us.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Coming up, we talk to one of the people who helped design the Green New Deal. She tells us why investing in climate change now will have a big payoff. Stay with us. You're streaming CBSN.